So welcome to today's webinar, Supporting the Mental Health Needs of Post-Secondary Students with Assistive Technology. This webinar is hosted by the Network of Assistive Technologists on this Friday, the 4th of December, 2020. Please join me in welcoming today's presenter, Linda Petty. Linda is a Canadian occupational therapist, registered with the College of Occupational Therapists in Ontario. With over 25 years of experience in supporting people with a range of disabilities, achieving their goals utilizing assistive technology, Linda has assisted students with physical, cognitive, and mental health conditions, among others, and during her over 20-year tenure as an assistive technology consultant at the clinic and clinical specialist at the University of Toronto. So welcome, Linda, and thank you for joining us today. And with that said, I want to hand over the presentation to you, Linda. And as you start your screen share and begin today's presentation, and I'll just stop my screen sharing, and we should be on to the interesting part of the presentation. So there you are, if you want to start sharing, Linda.
Okay. So are you seeing that?
No, at this point, we're still seeing your screen,
Okay,
your camera.
Come back to this.
There we are. It looks like you're starting to screen share. That's perfect.
Okay,
so,
great.
Thanks, Linda.
So, hello, and I think it's great that we're getting together this Friday, and also people that are registered so that they could get the recording. It's so encouraging to work with people from coast to coast to coast, as we like to say, and we encompass as a group a number of educational institutions and also people engaged in healthcare and various aspects of healthcare. So welcome. This is a topic that is dear to my heart. It's something that I worked on at the University of Toronto Scarborough during my tenure there as an AT consultant in particular. And again, it's part of a team effort in the sense that I worked on this as part of the team of disability consultants at UTSC, and in particular for some years with Sarah Coe, who is my co-author, or the lead author of the scoping review that we're going to discuss. And Sarah Coe and I also got involved with Dr. Todd Cunningham's, met with him, consulted with him, and he in turn also presented with me on this at ISTE in 2019. So I'm also going to say that some of these slides, we've done 3 separate presentations on this. So some of this comes from a range of things like that. So I think I can honestly say that no one would mind that I borrowed the slides, seeing as I was a co-author with all of them. So let's start then with the big picture. In 2011, the World Health Organization defined mental health as the state of well-being in which each individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and was able to make a contribution to his or her own community. Now, doesn't that sound lovely? Isn't that where we would all like to be? And of course, in particular, in the year of COVID-19. And mental illnesses are actual medical conditions. They're not issues like we like to say, or the media likes to call them. They're medical conditions that can disrupt a person's thinking, feeling, mood, ability to relate to others, and daily functioning. And a mental illness becomes a disability when one's ability to cope successfully is compromised. This interferes then with learning-related activities such as concentrating, reading, and thinking. So there are biological and genetic contributors, and there's also a situational impact when it comes to mental health. So you will see mental health conditions occurring partly because students are reacting with anxiety and with depression to stressors and negative life events, school shootings, parental divorce and breakups, bullying, suicides of people that they care about, school lockdowns, among others. In addition, students experience various situational and maturational crises while in college and university. And every teenager moving into their 20s goes through this. And in particular, though, students at a college and university level are experiencing this without the benefit of their parents and family support and their home community support. Often, if they are living away from home, they're with people that don't know them, so they don't know what their norm is. They don't realize that, oh, normally withdraw for a week at a time and stop eating and so on. So it becomes an issue partly from the situation of being away at school, of being alone in your own place, or being with a bunch of students in a dorm somewhere. So there's a lot of stressors that can contribute to the development or exacerbation of symptoms in those that are predisposed to experience a diagnosable mental health disorder. And mental illness frequently strikes for the first time in late adolescence and young adulthood, a time of life when, again, individuals are students in high school or college or university. And I think this can be very evident when there are very obvious mental health conditions, such as bipolar disorder, and less obvious with some of the maybe more discrete situations, like, again, someone who's depressed and just disappears. There's a very historically, one of our Canadian prime ministers married a college student who then, in a very public way, had a mental health disorder that affected her ability to be the prime minister's wife and do the things that were socially acceptable within that situation. So again, you can expect that these kind of problems will occur in this age group, in the situation they're in a post-secondary environment. There's also the stress factor. We all have stress, and mental health deterioration is when the stress of life, along with those biological risk factors, come together, lead to clinically significant stress or impairment in social, occupational, and other important areas of functioning. Again, typically the onset is between 15 and 29 years of age and after a major life stressor. Demographics of post-secondary students who have self-identified as having mental health disabilities. So the stats vary, at least 20%, and I would say the statistics go up to even 40% of US and Canadian university students have experienced a mental health problem. There's a lot of stigma around mental health. We have Bell, Let's Talk, and a number of other kind of public programs to try to destigmatize mental health disorders or mental health conditions, but it still is an issue. Do you dare share with your friends that your daughter is suicidal? Do you dare share that you are suicidal? So having this condition plus the stigma effect can really affect the likelihood of students for success or failure in the university community. The impact can be lower grades and higher rates of attrition than their peers. There are increasing numbers experiencing mental health problems, and the conditions themselves are escalating in severity. There are new medications and treatments that enable students with more severe conditions to participate in higher education. So that's another reason why the numbers are going up. Students can have their schizophrenia controlled by medication adequately for them to attend college, attend university. But post-secondary education has a rehabilitative potential. It provides structure and purpose and support to progress into other life roles. It's really important that this student with anxiety disorders is able to attend college or university, get their certificate, get their degree, and then hopefully move into the work world more positively than end up at McDonald's or wherever. Not putting down McDonald's, but I'm saying as compared with an entry-level job, to be able to get education so that they can move on to more than entry-level positions. So we being the institutions, the educational institutions, support students with mental health learning challenges through a number of interventions, both remedial and compensatory. So in particular, on the right side of the screen, the compensatory ones are things like counseling on learning strategies, cognitive strategies, medical supports and medications. It's very hard to get access to a psychiatrist, but a number of schools have set up links to various community psychiatrists or have psychiatrists on staff to be able to support students. They also provide, through whatever disability program you have available, accommodations in things like extensions on papers, note-taking supports, being able to take your exam in a quiet setting instead of with 300 people. The other thing that can be offered through institutions is assistive technology. So before we go into what assistive technology, I want to talk about what the literature says about assistive technology and mental health. And Sarah Coe and myself published a paper in Disability and Rehabilitation, the Assistive Technology Journal, and the URL for that is on the screen. It's titled Assistive Technology Accommodations for Post-Secondary Students with Mental Health Disabilities, a Scoping Review. And we did a search of the literature. So this was not research in the sense of case studies or large groups of students. Rather, we did a literature review. Our objective was to determine what evidence was available in peer-reviewed literature to support the use of assistive technology with this population, because there are challenges in funding eligibility. There's lack of access to AT services with this population, and also encouraged to do this in light of the clinical practice experience that we had had at the University of Toronto Scarborough, finding that assistive technology was very effective for this population. We limited the search years for this study from year 2000 to 2018. We worked on this study in 2018, 2019, to ensure that what we found was relevant for today's equipment, for today's education. And we looked at databases of medical, rehabilitation, psychology, and education literature. We did not look at what's called the gray literature, simply because anecdotal evidence or student stories about how things help isn't considered peer-reviewed evidence. We searched on a wide range of mental health conditions, like all of the depression, anxiety, and so on, and a wide range of assistive technology, software, computer, educational technologies. But we excluded students with autism spectrum disorder, and we also excluded AT that's used to treat mental health needs. So apps for your phone that help you meditate, or apps that help you work on your mindfulness, work on your breathing. So we didn't look at that type. We excluded those things from the study, focusing just on mental health conditions in the same article as assistive technology of whatever kind. So this is our Prisma flow diagram, which shows the that we started with 1,119 articles, and then 43 from, through the databases, 43 from other sources. So 1,145 articles, we reviewed those, both authors screened those, we excluded 1,109 of them, went through full text on 36 and came down to 7 articles that could be included in this review. And this is following the standard structure that is used for scoping reviews, the best practice for scoping reviews. Then we took those 7 articles, extracted the data from them, and looked at the diagnostic groups, looked at the academic difficulties, looked at the assistive technologies used. Now, a scoping review is not setting out to analyze how effective each study was, but rather looking at grouping the range of studies found from so many different databases, essentially. So the 7 studies that met the inclusion, 5 were from the US, 1 from the UK, 1 from Ireland. All of them were relevant to the North American issues. Common problems that the students had were academic, so in attendance, in time management, in participating, in reading, writing, and managing their workload. Psychosocial ones, such as isolation, self-identity issues, anxiety with socialization with others, cognitive issues, difficulty concentrating, memory problems, decision-making issues, and with day-to-day activities like managing their relationships, balancing leisure with academic work. And this then is the assistive technologies that those 7 articles identified as supporting mental health in those studies. So they range from blogs so that people could have an alternative participation instead of an in-person presentation or group attendance, note-taking alternatives like smart pens, digital recorders, software, audio note-taking, those things, graphic organizers for expressing ideas, note-taking, organizing, and planning your written work, AT for writing that addresses spelling, grammar, language production, speech to text, mind mapping, and proofreading, and then visual aids such as multimedia versions of content and also text to speech with highlighting. So take a look at those types of educational and assistive technologies. And I'm sure what's clicking through everybody's brain right now is, well, that's nothing different from what we normally do. And you're right. There really isn't anything in here that's totally unique to mental health needs. So the other things that came up from our scoping review was that there's a real underreporting on the use of assistive technology. So there's a lot of times when there's a concurrent diagnosis. So somebody has a physical condition and they also have depression. Someone has a learning disability, ADHD, and they also have anxiety, depression, whatever. So the assistive technology is prescribed for that other condition and funded for that. And the mental health condition isn't necessarily documented, or credit isn't given to how the person benefited in their mental health. It's an excellent study by Malcolm and Roll, dated in 2017. It looked at the outcomes of AT intervention. They used the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure and a survey. And they reported that students with a learning disability were most frequently referred for AT assessment prescription compared to other groups. And I would add ADHD in that. But they found that while the students' rating of academic task performance improved across all the diagnostic groupings they studied, when the students were given AT, the improvements were greatest for those with a mood disorder compared to other diagnostic groups. So the quote from their article says, students with a mood disorder often come with less exposure to AT and without a previously developed individual education program, as this kind of impairment isn't one commonly associated with technology-related learning needs. Such lack of experience with AT may coincide with lowered expectations for the potential utility of AT in their student roles. Yet the staff at the ATRC at this university observed that these students are pleasantly surprised and demonstrate substantial learning related improvements when the AT services are implemented. So I think what this is saying is that what the previous demographic information showed, these students aren't routinely offered assistive technology, but when they are, what Malcolm and Roll found is that they improved significantly when it was offered. So what I want to talk about is the functional impact of mental health disabilities and what AT options are helpful for them for compensation and for accommodation. And of course, the big areas that we generally do apply AT in or work with students around are reading, studying, note-taking, writing, and time management. So what I'm not going to do is give you a cookbook of every student with a major depressive disorder needs these 3 software packages. I want to talk about how we do AT assessment. So often we review the information we're given by the disability consultant or whoever is referring. We look at the diagnoses, any psychoed reports, medical certificate, any previous educational info, how the student's been doing if they're not a first-year student, and so on. But the problem is, if you start with that and simply a mental health diagnosis, it can lead us to prejudge based on a stereotype of that type of disability. We think then that we know the student's problems and we know what AT would be most helpful. And we rarely even think of doing any kind of measuring as a before and after to document whether we're correct or not. So that's where I get on my soapbox and talk about integrating the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure into your AT assessment. And in general, how I do this is establishing rapport with the student, with the general introduction, discussion on their strengths, and then start with their needs. Ask them to identify specific problems that this particular student is having, and really drilling down to specifics, not just slow reading or I don't test well and so on. Get some details. So it takes me 30 minutes to read 3 or 4 pages of my biology, or I only stay focused for 10 minutes. By 20 minutes into the lecture, I'm gone. So really drilling down, and with the COPM as well, there is scoring involved with it that is very helpful for the student to really own the problem and to really identify how bad a problem this is. They score themselves on their performance in this issue and also on their satisfaction with how they're doing. And it's the satisfaction score that can really tell you how willing they are to change and to work with this. So the major areas, again, as we all know, are time management, reading, studying, writing, and others depending on the focus of the program of study. So we talked about that. So I'm going to start with reading and talking about reading at a university level where it's 50 pages per week per course. And then the problem is you don't just read and tick the box, I've read it. You need to actually come up with something you can study from that reading, or else, it goes out the other ear and you're on to the next chapter of the next subject and you don't remember a thing from it. So often students with depression, they have decreased initiative, they have low motivation, low energy, and they get discouraged by the volume of reading, and they have a poor memory. Students with anxiety have difficulty concentrating due to recurrent and persistent thoughts and images. They have a lack of insight into the connections between ideas. And students with psychotic disorders have intrusive thoughts, sensations, voices, impaired focus, difficulty maintaining concentration, and it takes a lot of energy for them to maintain vigilance to make sure they're maintaining their focus. So a huge amount of energy goes into just making sure they're still on task, which can be exhausting. So all of these students have difficulty getting content from their readings and retaining key information. So when you look at AT accommodations for reading and studying, the very basic one is to accommodate with the text-to-speech software and with providing textbooks in electronic format and using the sound of the speech plus the highlighting to help the student maintain their focus, teach them how to adjust the speed. So if you're reading an English novel, you might go quickly. If you're reading very dense content, you might go slowly. Adjusting speech synthesis to suit the content and their preference. Students with psychoses have told me that hearing the text read out makes it easier for them to ignore the voices in their heads, the distracting thoughts. And you train the student to adjust the reading mode. So you might read continuously initially. You might switch to self-paced with more dense content to make sure that you can keep your focus, not just tune out and let it read. Have the student stop every page or topic and highlight the key terms, the definitions, the examples. And then to reinforce remembering their memory of those materials, as well as to create a summary of study notes, extract those highlights. And in Kurzweil 3000, you'd go out to column notes, or you'd go out to a 3-column page or a Word document, and have the student take it from what they've extracted, the key idea, the examples, to fill in their own definition of this key idea or of this concept and put it in their own words and reinforce this by adding their own example. So having done that, it really helps them link the ideas, and it really helps them put it into something that they understand easily, and it reinforces their memory of it. And then these notes become the summaries that they review before tests. You can use them as a cue card. You can do the function within Kurzweil of covering covering one column and showing the other column and so on. You can test yourself. You can have others test you. It means that when you go to study, you don't start by trying to reread everything you've read. You rather just read your study notes, the key important things. So with note-taking, students, again, with depression have low initiative, motivation, difficulty getting to class on time, difficulty staying tuned in. So note-taking supports being able to get notes from missed classes and using web option courses so they can attend at the time they're at their best. So rather than the morning, they watch Psych 101 in the afternoon when they're at a better place to take notes and stay focused. And again, the benefit of the web option type is You can use timers, which we'll talk about, to maybe just watch for 20 minutes, pause it, and then come back, and so on, so that you can make sure that you can maintain your focus. Students with anxiety, again, have a lot of problems with staying focused during class. Their thoughts go off in other directions. They're distracted by recurrent thoughts. So software like Audio Note Taker or any of the others that we discuss in the N.O.A.T Google group, are really effective. The student then is recording the audio with their PowerPoints or PDFs. So regardless of the focus, the content gets recorded. And then you work with them around returning and revising that material with that audio content to support them. So you train to, you use the PQR or Cornell note-taking strategies and teach the student to summarize each lecture, write out the key points, major concepts, and put that at the top of the lecture. If you're using something like Audio Note Taker, you can create some blanks at the top of the Audio Note Taker file and then put the key content there so that the student then again doesn't spend all this time listening to or reviewing each lecture, rather they just go to the summary. So again, some students I've worked with have used Kurzweil 3000 using the column notes to write their own notes while the prof is talking through what's essentially textbook content. And again, summarize each note, make sure that the key information is recorded in a way that it's easily available for studying at a later date. So common issues in writing. Students, again, with depression have low initiative, motivation, get discouraged by the size of the task and difficulty getting started, difficulty making decisions. So they really benefit from mind mapping software, templates, assignment calculator for planning, sometimes speech to text to facilitate getting text down, so voice recognition. Students with anxiety have difficulty remaining focused as they write, staying organized. They often initiate too many activities and have energy difficulties because of that. Voice recognition is often helpful to assist in brainstorming and getting those ideas out before they lose them and in keeping them focused on the writing task. When you're using voice rec, your eyes are on the page watching as that text flows out, and it naturally keeps you focused. The other thing that can be helpful is writing at least your initial drafts in a software like a text-to-speech software so that you can listen back to your work, so that you can do your proofreading from the software itself. And obviously, you know, there are functions for that in other applications as well. Time management is a really big one. So students with depression are easily overwhelmed with the volume of work, with the speed of courses. By midterms, they're way behind and they feel like quitting. They're unable to set realistic and achievable goals. Students with bipolar disorders tend to go at writing tasks in binges, all-nighters. They miss content, they don't research thoroughly, and then they kind of crash and burn afterwards after they've put this huge amount of energy into writing up this 10-page paper. They then drop out of sight. So students with anxiety tend to always fear what they might have missed, what they've forgotten. Presentations or papers seem overwhelming. And students with psychotic disorders have difficulty monitoring their own work progress. They can't change work approaches when necessary. So all of these problem areas really benefit from time management strategies, time management apps, and so on. So we look at apps and software for timing both your work times and your breaks. It's very basic. So things like Pomodoro, how to stay on task and then take a break, and then be called back to your task and then take a break. Generally, you don't want students working more than 2 hours on any one topic at a time. Using calendaring software with reminders, and make sure that it's available on the phone and also on your computer, your desktop, your laptop, and you allocate 2 to 3 hours of time for reading and for studying for every hour of lecture. So you help the student set up first their classes on the calendar, and you put reminders in so that they arrive at classes on time as well, in spite of the commute or whatever. You also then add time for reading and studying for each course based on the number of hours of lecture, or if there are science-based courses that have labs and so on, then that changes as well, and you adjust accordingly. You have to include breaks for physical activity. That's been shown to be very effective as a way of treating your mental health. Be sure to take breaks for exercise, for food, for fun. And even though that schedule then appears very full, the student knows that they haven't dropped the balls. It decreases the anxiety. You've got it all there, and you know it's looked after. You don't have to always be thinking, did I forget something? Have I not gotten this done? It also gives you a place besides writing on the back of your hand or sticky notes as to things to write down, things that have changed or new to-dos, like read chapter 24 for the next lecture. It's really quick to just add that in your notes on your phone for that class. Use of an assignment calculator is really critical, and I can give you the URL for one if you don't have one. It really helps the student Swiss cheese it, make holes in a big job, and break it down into specific to-dos. I tell students that they'll easily get 5 to 10% higher grade if they use something like that so that they don't forget the steps. A lot of students, they get a topic and they sit down and try to write their first draft just from there. They find 2 or 3 articles and bang, they're off. They haven't really done a literature review. They haven't outlined. They just jump right in. Templates are really helpful for various writing tasks or for lab reports. So teaching a student where are the templates, how they're easy to access, how to modify the templates to meet their needs. Those are all really important AT tools that will help them with writing and with time management. So I'm wondering, is Lauren available? Lauren was going to share about a student she's worked with. Lauren, I know you're registered for today. Could you turn your microphone on and just walk us through this?
Sure. This is Lauren. I was working with a student who we were doing an intake and a brand new student, and she was talking about how she had a lot of anxiety and with her OCD with both reading and with writing. It got to the point where she had assignments and things that were due and she just shut down. And it got to the point when she started thinking about reading and writing assignments, she would actually self-harm herself. And so we went through some different kinds of technologies like, read and write, or, using voice typing, using some screen readers, which really she had never been introduced before. But in the long term, it's ended up really helping her, get her studies done, but it's actually lessened the anxiety and she's able to function better within her classes. So she really helped me get a mind shift as far as, along with Linda, as far as we have a lot of these tools that are available that people often don't think about that can help with anxiety or depression, and in different ways. So it's really helped me shift my mind when I'm working, with all students, that really these tools can be for everyone, and it can really help in different ways. So.
Great. Lauren, can you just introduce yourself a bit more, where you're working, what your role is?
Sure. So I work at St. Mary's University in Minnesota. I work with students with accommodations and accessibility. And part of that recently really has been looking, at assistive technology and accessible technology, especially in light of, the coronavirus. And, majority of our students are online now. So I think, looking at AT and accessible technology are really important. And for us, we've just seen an increase in students with asking for mental health assistance. And this has been one of those areas where these kind of tools have become quite helpful.
Great. Thank you. Thanks a lot. So I'll tell you about another student, third-year university student, major in English, specialist in psycholinguistics, was referred for an AT assessment with difficulties with note-taking, test-taking, studying. Her mental health diagnoses included generalized anxiety disorder, bipolar disorder, and panic disorder with agoraphobia. So when I then assessed her and went through the COPM, she identified difficulty with critical thinking, with problem solving and distractibility, especially impacting taking notes. And she wasn't sure what was important in the content of lectures or when she was trying to take notes from her textbooks. And anxiety really worsened those problems. She had difficulties memorizing reference material and decision-making with the multiple choice tests. She became quite anxious and would choose incorrect answers even when she remembered the material. She would handwrite her notes as well as obtain copies of volunteer note taker notes, but found it really tedious trying to then retype this handwritten material. She had a MacBook computer and she'd leave that at home because it was heavy, commuted 45 minutes to campus with just an iPad for note-taking. So we started with then the note-taking concepts of PQR5 or Cornell note-taking. She was shown how she could implement those strategies using audio note-taker software and import the note-taking audio and text files from her iPad for the home use. And then she was able to already have everything in one place and be able to very quickly do some added notes to it and do her summaries. She also benefited from Kurzweil 3000 for use on her with reading because of, she found that highlighting text and extracting it out to the 3-column study notes feature and being able to was really helpful for her in identifying key things and in finding out what she should be studying. And she also found it was really helpful that she could take audio texts to read on her iPad as she was commuting. So it really, I think with any student, this thing of having the technology and the content of their educational material available anywhere, everywhere is really important. U of T Scarborough is a commuter campus, and it really helps to be able to have the student have the textbook on their desktop at home, save it to the server, listen to it as they're on their hour bus commute, and then at school go into any computer lab and bring it down from the server and continue to do their reading, do their summary. So I think one of the problems can be funding. And for this particular student, it was still in the era when we didn't have web licenses of software. So when her 30-day trial of Kurzweil ran out. And it was also the end of the bursary period, so she wasn't able to get funding. But when she finally did get set up with funding and be able to get full versions of Audio Note Taker and Kurzweil 3000, she did very well. And using outcome measures, she also was shown to do really significantly improve her capacity to learn and to get good marks. Another student I'll just mention briefly, again, our administration would like everything easily identified, would like to collect the numbers. But I had one student refer to me with anxiety for time management and so on. And when I worked with her around where her problems were, she identified reading as being this huge issue and said she'd gotten through high school, and she was an English major, by her mother reading to her the contents of her books because she herself could not read quickly and effectively. And so when I went back to the disability consultant with that, there was a bit of surprise and a bit of reluctance to go through a whole expensive psychoeducational assessment, but we did get that done, and it showed, yes, she had a learning disability. So once we were able to set her up with not just the time management, but also the Kurzweil software, so someone else didn't have to read it for her, she did very well. What was interesting was this same student then incurred more physical issues with hypotonicity, low muscle tone and loose ligaments, and major shoulder issues in her third year. And we had to again revise things. We set her up with voice recognition software for her writing, as typing was painful and uncomfortable. And we also set her up with a rolling bag for carting her stuff around, and again, electronic textbooks so that she could access them from anywhere. And that student went on to graduate with very high marks and did extremely well. And a good chunk of how well she did and how well she managed her anxiety in university, I think, was also due to assistive technology supports. Now, would anyone else like to jump in here? We're doing fine time-wise, and does anyone else want to just give a quick summary of a student they've worked with, what their mental health needs were, and how the assistive technology worked for them, or even didn't work for them? Go ahead and turn your mic on, introduce yourself. And don't everybody speak at once. Okay, we can come back to this then if it's not a good time and people don't feel comfortable at this point.
As well, if anybody has anything they'd like to put into the chat window instead of using their microphone,
Sure.
we can certainly address that as well. While we maybe give people a few moments to gather their thoughts there,
Sure.
Linda, did you want to launch those polls that you had talked about?
Oh, Doug, I'm so sorry. I totally blew right past that.
That's
yes,
fine.
Let's do the polls that I was supposed to do after slide 6 was the first one.
So I've launched the first one there. It should have popped up on everybody's screen. If you could take a moment as well to register your votes there, and just to help those who maybe not seeing the poll display properly. That the question is, how often do you provide assessment services or recommend AT to students who have a sole diagnosis or identification of a mental health disability, also maybe referred to as a condition, diagnosis, or identification?
And the radio buttons are for regularly, rarely, and never.
Tag teaming it here today, Linda. Thanks for filling that in. Okay. Looks like there's still a few votes popping in here, but
So the next question, how often do you assess students, if you're the AT assessment person, who have a primary identification of another condition like learning disability, ADHD, a physical disability, visual impairment, but who have a concurrent mental health disability? And again, the radio buttons are for regularly, rarely, and never.
Okay. So again, if you're not seeing the second question, like the person, like myself, just make sure that you respond to the first one, and I'll give you the option to then click next for the second question. So seeing most of the responses are in here, so I'll end that poll question here in just a few seconds, and just giving the last few seconds for people to respond. Okay, and I'll end the poll, and then we'll share the results here with our audience, Linda. So,
Okay. So 45% are saying they do regularly provide assessment services for AT for students who have the sole diagnosis of a mental health disability. That's excellent. And never is 13%, rarely 42%. So we're looking at more than half. It's very rare to never, but at least we have 45% doing this. And then as far as students who have primary identification of another condition, like an LD or whatever, 81% of people regularly see students that have a mental health condition plus another condition. And then again, rarely is 13% and never is 6%. That's great. Thank you, Doug.
okay.
I think, as we all know, we're whole people, and mental health is a part of everybody's everyday life. So frequently students with ADHD, for example, who are good students, smart students, might have dysthymia, periodic depression, because they're not achieving to their own standards. Often they have a goal like going on for a master's degree, but the marks they get won't support them in that. So do expect that your students that are coming in with other primary diagnoses might also have mental health conditions. But also, if you think about it, when you're providing them with an assessment and demonstrating software and equipment that can support their learning disability, their ADHD, their visual impairment, whatever, you can also emphasize that this time management software that will help them keep track of what they need to do and not get distracted will also help them feel less anxious about forgetting things. You can draw the line for them between their concrete identified problem to the mental health need.
Okay. I'm just noticing that we had a comment in the chat box here, Linda, from one of our participants is sharing that at Sheridan, where they work, they have similar experiences as you've shared, especially with their international students who may be referred for mental health supports, but have an undiagnosed learning disability such as learning disability or ADHD, who without AT support would struggle academically.
Yes. The other issue that can come up with international students is certain cultural groups, it's not acceptable to have a disability of any type. And so students struggle with that on a mental health spectrum, because even being diagnosed with ADHD or an LD is shaming to them, to their family, and so on. So you end up with mental repercussions of identification of that disability. And some families that just don't accept it whatsoever. So what's been shown is that according to the scoping review, AT can help accommodate mental health disabilities. And certainly if 45% of you are regularly assessing these students, I'm sure that's been your experience. But what it also showed is that there's very little peer-reviewed literature on this topic. And it's not a hot topic in the AT journals. It's not something that comes up 2 or 3 articles per journal. And similarly, within the journals that are focused on mental health, it's not something that's being advocated for as a way to accommodate mental health issues. So there's a real need, I feel personally, and I think the literature supports this, for objective tracking and data gathering. Let me just get this going again. So we're missing assistive technology outcomes often in education. And admin people, the students, and all of us have an interest in discovering how well AT is helping the students achieve their goals. Certainly manufacturers, researchers all want to see the impact of AT on learning and classroom performance, but it's challenging. Really elusive results. It's complicated because each individual student has unique needs. And there's a lot of variation in funding and in delivery systems. Some of you are working in augmentative communication. Some of you are working in provinces where there isn't funding in education, there's only funding in health, or vice versa. It's also challenging in that you might have provided great assistive technology, but it's poorly integrated into the educational environment. One thing that set us all back a while ago was when there was a study done showing that having a computer for note-taking in the classroom decreased your focus on the lecture and decreased your learning. And so all of a sudden, many profs wanted to ban the use of computers in the classroom. So if you have one, you're stigmatizing yourself by saying, hey, I have a disability. That's the only reason why I'm allowed to have my computer here. The other problem is the difficulty of identifying the role of assistive technology when you have so many other factors. You can't just say, look at the marks, because marks will vary based on the topic. Marks will vary based on the level. So third year courses are more challenging than second year, and fourth year courses are more challenging again. You can't say that, you know, getting an A is the indication that the assistive technology worked. So I do think we need to do more work in this area, and we will come to that. I did want to provide references for the scoping review that we did, and for the references to what I've highlighted in this article. And these are the scoping review references themselves, the 7 articles that we drew from to come up with these conclusions. So, Doug, do you want to launch the second poll? That would be really helpful to do that at this point.
Absolutely. And just a quick thing before I do that is those references, these slides will be part of the replay that's posted. So for those who weren't able to copy all that down in 20 seconds.
Well, and similarly, the article itself is on the N.O.A.T website as a resource. So
yes,
we were allowed to have so many copies each. And so one of them is posted at the, if you're a member of N.O.A.T, you can access it. If not, you can go to through your college or university library and access disability and rehabilitation, assistive technology. Go to September 2020 and access the journal and the article itself.
and the other option you can do, and if I owe you or the publisher some money for this, Linda, then please accept my apologies and send me the bill. But I did share the PDF through the chat for our participants today.
Great.
but as you say, it is on the AT Brain for a resource able to be downloaded there. So if anybody is not a member of N.O.A.T and has no idea what we're talking about, please go to N.O.A.T.ca, N-O-A-T.ca, and there's a join tab there, and then we'd be happy to welcome you to the N.O.A.T family, and you'll be able to get that resource and many others. So, and all right, on that note, I'm going to launch the second poll here for us, and I'll do my best to read the questions here. The first question is, would you be willing to participate in a virtual N.O.A.T discussion session on assistive technology and mental health by providing a case study example of something that worked or didn't work, or would you be interested in attending? So a two-part question there is yes, I would attend is one of the answers. First answer. The second answer is yes, I would offer a case study example. And if you're going to offer the case study example, we assume you're going to attend. The second question that should be popping up for you after you answer the first one is, would you be interested in attending a N.O.A.T session on integrating outcome measures into your assessment and AT service delivery and exploring opportunities to get involved in research to document the effectiveness of AT in education? Options there. Number one is yes, I would attend and could offer a case study. And yes, I would attend. Sorry, go ahead, Linda.
Yeah, I think we got the radio buttons mixed up there. So yes, I would attend, or no, not interested should be the two things.
Okay.
Case studies was the top one. So
Okay.
yes or no?
Yeah, my apologies. So if the one person who answered yes, they would attend, we'll assume that means that you would, and offer case study, that would be yes, we'd attend. So, so that's great.
Okay.
So yes, the options on that second question are yes, you would attend, or no, I'm not interested. So just going to allow the polling to finish up here. And while that happens, Linda, there are a couple other comments in the chat. Burke J is one of our participants today who has mentioned that they just wanted to mention the challenge of medication being taken by some with mental health challenges and how becoming groggy makes concentration difficult. So the AT also alleviates those challenges. So
good point.
Yeah.
Very good point.
Okay. So then there is another comment in the chat we'll come back to in just a moment. I'm just going to end the polling here and then share the results for us.
Okay. Wow.
So looks like.
So Doug, that looks like a hot topic for a Friday afternoon.
Yes. And there's something to be said about that, because on a Friday afternoon, it takes a lot to make it a hot topic. So yeah, did you want to actually I interrupted you there, Linda. Did you want to share the totals for those who might be having difficulty seeing the results?
Well, so 100% of people said yes, they would attend a discussion on AT and mental health, but no one was really that interested in committing to offering an example or a case study. So we'll have to rethink that. Like, obviously this is an important topic for people, and yet people aren't necessarily comfortable with sharing their own examples or where they've seen things be effective or not be effective. So then when it comes to another session on integrating outcome measures into the assessment and service delivery, and on opportunities to get involved with research to document the effectiveness of AT in education, we got a 92%, and I think add the 4, so 96% of people would be interested in that, which is excellent, because I think that's a huge need. And that would be something that at best I would think would be a January thing. And this was something that other people hopefully would be willing to be involved in, like Rosalie Wang, who's the head of the OT network on assistive technology and also a researcher at the University of Toronto. So we'll see what we can pull together for that. I'm always happy to talk about using the COPM as an AT assessment tool and outcome measure tool, but I think we need to go beyond that. And so I can try to pull something together on that.
Perfect. I appreciate that very much, Linda. So it sounds like a thing of stay tuned for future sessions to carry on some of this discussion and unpack it in a little more detail. So that's great.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just, sorry, go ahead, Linda.
So Sarah Coe is the lead author for our scoping review. So she's at the University of Toronto, sarah.co at utoronto.ca. So if you have questions related to the article, she can be reached that way. And my Gmail account is up there and I'm available as well.
Okay,
So
perfect.
I'm going to stop screen sharing.
Okay, and then I'll
just see if there are any questions. I mean, I have not in the chat window, so.
Okay, there is one question.
Any questions on some stuff?
Yep, there's one question in here that again from our person attending from Sheridan that commented earlier is first of all thanking you for sharing the information, Linda, and asking if there's any suggestions regarding bridging the gap when AT is provided for independent learning, such as taking notes, reading, and working on assignments. Because of functional limitations, but because of documentation, reading, writing, scores, etc., access to AT as an accommodation specifically for tests is not available.
So maybe you could clarify, is it because of a mental health diagnosis isn't considered adequate to obtain those accommodations?
That's what it sounds like. I'd encourage this person from Sheridan, if they're able to and feel comfortable, to unmute their microphone and clarify for us, as well as this is certainly an opportunity for anybody else who wishes to speak up and contribute by voice instead of text chat to go ahead. So.
Thanks, Doug. This is Ashima from Sheridan. I appreciate the opportunity to speak up. So just wanted to have a conversation around this, Linda. You talked about the one student that you were working with where you collaborated with the disability counselor because they were originally referred for mental health supports. So I've definitely been in those scenarios where we have documentation supporting accommodations, but not necessarily the support of AT. Of course, when you're working with the student, when you're doing your assessments, you see that there are limitations that are related to reading, writing that AT can assist with. But because those limitations aren't documented on their whatever documentation that they have come with, there is that gap of providing the use of that AT in a testing situation. So I'm wondering, is it the use of tools like the COPM or other tools that would fit the gap? Or if you have any other recommendations or suggestions?
One option, I mean, the problem is that every institution has their own system for analyzing, documenting, and so on. But if you worked with the student around the difference it makes in their everyday studies, and were able to get some more objective measures from that, as far as, okay, they cannot at all take notes for their chemistry lecture, whatever, without audio note taker. And then you move into being able to, or rather it should be something more test related, and then present those as your documentation as a thought. I would also suggest going back to the people who are the disability consultants or the counselors or whatever, and asking them to refer the student to get more documentation. Because frequently it's a student that maybe hasn't been seen by a psychiatrist or hasn't had a psychoeducational assessment that backs up the assistive technology. And in that case, you need to encourage the student and the admin system to go back and get the information needed. So those would be my initial off the top thoughts on that. And I have hit that before, and the student, you know, finding that there's a need for more documentation before they'll be provided with that kind of support.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ashima, for sharing that. And being brave enough to come on with the microphone unmuted there. And just a reminder, if anybody else would like to do so, unmute your microphone and we'll see you doing that and be able to bring you on. In the chat, there's a couple other comments here for us, Linda. Karen has shared that Kurzweil alternate format requires proof of print disability. However, the student may purchase ebook versions which have accessibility options for reading aloud and highlighting, etc. So,
what I've also found is if you have the web license, like certainly UTSC or the whole of the University of Toronto found it much more cost effective getting the web license. And then it's far easier to present your qualitative information and get approval to provide it to a student who doesn't have the diagnosis of print disability. Because we found, for example, we had 10 site licenses of Kurzweil 3000 for the exam room. Well, just buying it among the 3 campuses more than covered that cost of the web license for our campus. And you can use that for thousands of students. So again, having access to the web license of some of these softwares can help tremendously as far as making it available immediately. The student is there with you and you can get them downloading the product and getting it registered right away. And B, it means they get it then rather than 90 days later when their funding finally comes in. So I found it made a huge difference for in terms of service delivery, being able to offer web license software. And I think a number of people have Read and Write, again, as a web license. So that definitely, if you have that option, that can also alleviate some of the issues. And Kurzweil is definitely very in tune with this. I've been really well supported by Kurzweil as far as talking about how helpful their software can be for mental health conditions. Sarah Coe and I did an interview with Corey Navis from Kurzweil in August on this, and then I did a hands-on session that they broadcast through their Facebook, whatever, to show how you can use their software to help with the various mental health issues. And I think it's certainly worth a discussion with Kurzweil, this sort of term print disability, because they are very aware that their software can be used for far more than print. So it is something that should be discussed. And yeah, I agree that access to the appropriate, useful documentation on mental health related disabilities is a concern. We have certainly in Ontario, there's a real shortage of service providers in psychologists, well, not psychologists so much as psychiatrists, simply because the issue is cost. It can be a huge cost to get access to medical mental health supports or rather psychology, and there's a huge shortage of psychiatric supports. So again, it can come back to institutional support. We had the amazing support of a psychiatrist from Markham Stouffville Hospital who would see our students and who was a specialist in adolescents with mental health disorders and in ADHD and so on. So again, push or not push, encourage your institution to work on this as being a critical part of service delivery. Anyone else have some thoughts on that?
Yes, just one additional comment to your response and Karen's comment there is that sometimes having that universally accessible software allows the people, as Karen's saying here, some of the publisher platforms and the ebooks have it built in, but then that limits the only people who buy those versions, whereas assistive technology is sometimes limited only to those with disabilities and the appropriate documentation diagnosis. If we just go, as you're saying, Linda, with regards to kind of a universal design, and let's get it out there on a site license, a web license, whatever the public or the software is called, then we're just talking universal design. Then we can support anybody and everybody, and even there's that little thing called stigma with mental health situations specifically that sometimes doesn't disappear, obviously, but it's reduced greatly for them as well.
Yes. One of
sorry.
the articles in the scoping review talked about essentially universal design ways. Scott Grabinger's article, A Framework for Supporting Post-Secondary Learners with Psychiatric Disabilities in Online Environments, was talking totally how coursework and so on could be reformatted to support learners with psychiatric disabilities. There are drawbacks. Obviously, there isn't a huge amount of desire amongst professors and teachers to totally revamp all of their work to provide it in visual and multiple formats and so on and so forth. But regardless, I think if we made more gains in the universal design front, it would benefit this group of students too.
All right. Excuse me. Mary Ann is just sharing that an appreciation of the encouragement of drilling down on the tasks of being a learner to determine the student's needs and the appropriate aids and supports, and then further comments that the getting appropriate or useful documentation for the mental health related disabilities, it's just a general concern. So
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not sure if there's anybody else. I'm not seeing any unmuted microphones here, but just to encourage anybody that wants to join in one more time here or into the chat window to type their questions. Sorry, go ahead, Linda.
No, just I appreciate that so many people have attended and registered to get the recording and so on, and that you're hanging in there instead of thinking, yeah, maybe part of that is so many of us are working from home. It's not, we're not worried about the commute, but
true.
Regardless, I really do thank you for coming and thank you for your attention. I feel quite strongly about this topic, and I'm sorry that I kind of raced through some of it. I tend to let my nerves show that way, but thank you for your patience in listening to me blast away here.
Yeah, very much appreciate you going through that amount of information, Linda. It's a super amount of information to have gone through regardless. And on top of that, this is a 90-minute session that we've had. In most of our webinars are an hour, and when you and I were planning this, it was pretty obvious there was no way this could be a 60-minute discussion. As well as even looking at it to the point where we hope to have those future sessions to dive down and drill down a little bit more in depth. So yeah, everybody that's here today, as well as yourself, Linda, I thank you. That's definite. This information is very timely and able to be able to be very useful across every aspect of our jobs. Plus, I would say, I'd hesitate to say, well, I know I won't hesitate to say the fact of our personal lives and professional lives as individuals ourselves, with or without a mental health diagnosis. So in these COVID times that we're dealing with. So Um, Overall, very often I find it's an unidentified need is the mental health supports that are needed, and we need to look much more than just putting the tool in there in the person's hands. It is a lot about matching the student, their style, their strengths, their weaknesses, the individual needs that they have based on their mental health diagnosis and what that means to them. So you've shared a couple things with us here today, Linda, and some of our audience has as well, that sometimes the simplest things to support from a mental health perspective are like just even using the traditional features we all know of in some of the technology, assistive technology, or just general
Mhm.
day-to-day technology. That's sometimes just putting those tools out there and maybe in framing it in a different way that's geared to the actual mental health struggles, and drawing that connection for those individuals to be able to use it and see how it can impact and help them.
Mhm.
It's sometimes that's all it takes. So
Yeah.
there's a lot.
This isn't
Sorry, go ahead.
new. This isn't new technology. It's just learning to apply it in ways that make sense for students with mental health disabilities and being able to connect with them on a level that they're open to using this and seeing that, yes, this could work for me. So yes, it's not new technology. It's just a new application that in turn we need to advocate for, and for the funding and for the supports needed, for
Yeah,
sure.
and I'm just sharing
Well, and thank you, Doug, for your leadership in even starting this, but also in continuing and promoting these types of sessions. It's great to come together and do this.
and we hope to do many more in the future. And thank you for that support there, Linda. I appreciate that. I just reposted a comment that you shared in the chat. Thanks to Zoom's infinite options that came through directly to me instead of out to the entire audience. So I just reposted that with your thanks to
Okay.
everyone for the feedback and support during this webinar and such. So yeah, so at this point, I just want to open it up one last time here. If anybody has anything they'd like to add into the chat box for questions, comments, or feedback, and then from anybody that wishes to unmute themselves, we'd still have a few moments that we could certainly offer them to come on using their voice. And if we're not seeing anything else coming through here, then what we'll do is we'll head into our wrap up. So not seeing anything coming through. So Linda, again, a huge thank you for being with us today. As assistive technology professionals, we always need to have more information at our disposal and more tools to be able to use. Our toolboxes, they're never full. You've given us an awful lot today to add into that toolbox of ours and into our own personal and professional lives. So no doubt it's going to further assist each of us as we go out and serve those that we support. So your support, Linda, of the assistive technology profession in general, overall, worldwide, as well as the network of assistive technologists, it's greatly appreciated by myself, and I know everybody here today and our members in the network of assistive technologists. So I'd say please do keep in touch, and hopefully we would be able to work together in the future. But I think by the response to those polls today that we will be working together in the future to further look into this. So I'm excited about that and being able to unpack this topic in more detail. So yeah.
Great.
So
Very good.
yeah. So lastly, for everyone here today that's and those who are watching the replay of this, thank you for joining us. And remember, you can't spell education without AT. So until next time, take care and stay safe.